Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Father-Son Packers podcast, your source for Packers news, notes, and analysis. My name is Tommy, and I'm one of your hosts, and I'm joined, as always, by my co-host, my dad, Matt. Dad, how you doing?
I'm doing all right. We are about to get a whole new batch of data.
I was going to say
this week.
Massive influx of information, which is always, that's the thing. It does feel like, you're kind of searching in the dark with a flashlight before the combine in some ways, and then the combine comes, and very informative. Not just the athletic testing, but more just, the information about the medicals on all these players, the information about what teams are saying. You get
who's
interviews.
Talking to whom?
Who's talking to who? You get interviews from all these people. And also, you always get the rumors of like, oh, well, Matthew Stafford's talking to Tom Brady, et cetera. It's like you get crazy.
And then a fight breaks out.
And then a fight breaks out between reporters, which, it's electric. We love it every single year. One of these days I got to make it out to Indy and actually go to this thing because it does seem like it would be a fun time. But anyway, we are here today.
What do you think would be more interesting? The combine or the draft?
Probably the draft. I think the draft would be more fun. Although, at the same time, it depends on where it would be. If it's in Green Bay, it'd probably be very fun. But at the same time, it is a lot of standing around. And I do think some of the fun of the draft is, I think the coverage of the draft, unlike a lot of sporting events, is actually really, really good. Day of. I think they do a really good job of the production of all of it. So that's tough. Maybe, I don't know. I do want to make it out to both at some point. But anyway, we are here today with the combine coming up, like we mentioned, to kind of do a little bit of a, initial combine chatter. Now, no one has done any of the testing yet as we record Thursday morning, February 27th. But we're going to talk about some of the interviews that have been done, some potential Packers-related news breaks that have come out, just kind of an odds and ends stuff from the initial stuff from the combine, talking about which prospects are there, which prospects aren't, which ones, maybe we're keeping an eye on, what other teams are saying that might be impacting the Packers. We got some news from the NFLPA's report card on teams, which we'll talk about. The Packers did well in some areas amongst the players and not so well in other areas. Talk about what Brian Gutekunst said in his presser at the combine. A lot of interesting stuff there. A lot of stuff that, might maybe indicate where they're going with the draft and free agency, although, he's genuinely pretty tight-lipped about those things. Some news on Jaire Alexander, which we'll talk about briefly, that Rappaport broke, before being yelled at by Jordan Schultz in the Starbucks of Indianapolis. Talk a little bit about what recent mock drafts have it going from some people who are maybe more tapped into stuff. But Dad, a lot of stuff to talk about in this one. So anything you wanted to touch on before we do, or should we just get on into it?
We can just get into the topics. Then we're starting
see where we get
combine, really.
Yes, it's
a few press conferences.
Bit of a miscellaneous episode in a lot of ways, but let's start off with Brian Gutekunst's press conference because that's probably the most important thing that we've had so far of all of the pieces of news from the combine, and
most informative perhaps. Though
yes.
It is lying season, but sometimes.
I think
Brian Gutekunst tells you what he's actually going to do.
I think he lies maybe the least of all the GMs. He just
I think he lies by not lying. Right?
I do find that he says so many platitudes that it the way he talks is so nondescript that it kind of belies how much information he's actually giving you. And you're like, wait a minute. Did he just say that they're going to It's I can't tell because it was so
quarterback.
It was so monotone and measured. It was wait, did he just actually give us information? But just some notes from watching. He had two pressers. So he had one that was with the national media, which was honestly not very informative at all. So if you're looking to only watch one, watch the other one, which was with the local media from Green Bay, which I think had a lot more interesting questions and answers. But let's start off with his thoughts on the draft in general. I thought the biggest piece of information there was they asked him what he thought the strengths of this draft were, which we'll talk about a little bit later based on some big boards going out. But he said that he believes that offensive line and defensive line are the strengths of this draft. And so kind of makes you think. Go ahead.
Oh, and I think by defensive line, he must have been including edge rushers and D tackles.
I'm guessing he just meant front four in general, which, from the defensive line perspective, that's
defensive line. With our current alignment, it's defensive line, but other teams, it's not defensive
linebackers, which we'll talk about in a bit as well, too, when it comes to Quay Walker's contract. But for that, that's definitely indicative of, that kind of matching the Packers' needs in a lot of ways, because we talked about a million times on this podcast since the end of the season, pass rush wasn't good enough, which Brian Gutekunst was asked about as well later. But in terms of the draft in general, like I mentioned, he said he believes the offensive line, defensive line are strengths of the draft. But they also did ask him about his draft strategy and whether or not, he had that quote at the end of the season about this is the time for urgency and it's time to start competing for championships. But he did say that quote was not indicative of changing any kind of philosophy or approach in free agency in the draft. We did wonder, Dad, about in free agency, maybe going for like an older player in free agency if you're truly going for urgency. Any thoughts on that quote? Maybe.
So what does that quote mean? Was that quote just completely worthless?
I think it's just lip service.
It's urgency, but we're not going to change our strategy in any way. Then what does it mean?
Does that just mean we've always been urgent? What are you talking about?
Yeah, exactly.
it's okay.
That could be the answer.
So we're just saying words, I guess.
We're always urgent.
Yeah, but no, so that was interesting. But pivoting over to the pass rush point, just to move over to that, because like he mentioned, he thought the offensive line and defensive line were the strengths of the draft. And so a lot of people from the Green Bay press specifically asked about, what he thought about the edge rushers in this past season, given that it was a position that struggled a lot. They asked him about, Lucas Van Ness and how important this upcoming season is for him. So he obviously gave a pretty generic quote there, but the quote that was like, quote, "We need to affect the quarterback more in our front four with just 4 players, and Lucas is a big part of that," end quote. He talked about, he really appreciated Lucas Van Ness's professionalism and, expects him to take a big jump this year, because obviously he's not going to say, I don't expect him to play well this year. So take with that.
Or to have his playing time decrease as the year goes on, or be one of the bottom
pressure rate guys,
rushers and pressure.
It was a rough season for Lucas Van Ness, and sophomore slumps, all that. They have sophomore slumps for a reason. It's not just for alliteration. But I do think it is kind of a prove it season for Lucas Van Ness to prove that he can at least be a role player in this league. Because right now it's like, oh man, he's not even like a rotational guy, and you took him top 13, so that's not ideal. But in terms of other stuff about the edge rushers and the group up front in general, he also mentioned how he thought a 4-man rush was really important for finishing games off, which we talked about last year. We talked about how every single time you had what was it? I wish I had the numbers in front of me. It was 10 different times the Packers defense went on the field either needing to get the ball back down a score or having the lead, and they failed all but 2 times, and it was against the Colts and one other kind of
the Rams.
The Rams
one was decent.
Yeah, exactly. So overall, like we mentioned before, the Packers defense was just really bad situationally at the end of games, and Brian Gutekunst seems to think that was as a result of the front four. And they asked him about adding to that group, and he says he feels really good about the guys they have in that room, but it just has to be better this season, which probably indicates why they maybe moved on from Rebrovich and brought in Covington as defensive line coach. But I think they have to make an addition there, right? Especially with him saying that he thinks the defensive line class is strong, right?
I would think so. The fact that he mentioned it was strong favors that. Part of it, if you want to be a little bit critical, is it's not my fault.
The guys are good.
I'm giving you guys great players.
The players are good, man.
Why aren't you doing better?
It's like, Lucas? No, that dude's a star. I know I spent a top 13 pick on that guy. No, yeah, it's that's true. There's a little bit of well, I don't know. I'm giving you some top shelf ingredients. I don't know what the chefs are doing in that room, but
right.
I don't know if they're not.
That was a rough cake.
Yeah, they're not putting those veggies in the fridge. I guess they're just letting them out to spoil. I don't know, man. I got those things from the farmer's market 2 years ago. I'm still waiting on the results. But yeah, so that was. He clearly thinks the edge rushers are important, and he clearly thinks the receivers are important as well. There were a lot of questions about the receiver position, understandably, probably stemming a little bit from the Josh Jacobs talk, which, he mentioned was like, oh yeah, we don't really listen to when players go out into the media. What they say in the media is fine, but we don't really incorporate that into our draft talk. He's like, obviously we talk with all our players individually, privately, getting what they their thoughts on stuff. But overall it doesn't really impact our draft boards. But in terms of receivers, he did say that in terms of the receivers they have on the roster, this was something I actually missed, Dad. Did you know that Jaden Reed tore his labrum against the Eagles? I had somehow missed that.
I only heard it recently.
Yeah.
Just listening to the podcast. So I missed that when it happened. I know he got injured, but I didn't know what it was. And I'm actually a little surprised. They usually don't actually let us know what injuries are this time of the year.
Oh, yeah. I think the only reason
we don't have to tell you, so we're not gonna.
I think the only reason they know is because Jaden Reed like himself told like Matt Schneidman. And so that it's like, well, you are cat's out of the bag. But Brian Gutekunst said that he might be limited during the offseason, but should be fine by training camp. In terms of other receivers,
means he'll be affected in the spring program still. So that's a little time.
I mean, I'm assuming for a torn labrum, he probably had to have surgery, but I don't think we have an official report on that. Speaking of surgery, though, Christian Watson did have surgery a couple of weeks after that initial torn ACL, so that's pretty normal. It wasn't one of those things where they really had to wait. Sometimes with these torn ACLs, there's a lot of swelling and they really have to wait. But sounds like that surgery went well. And then for Dobbs, they asked him, about like someone kind of essentially mentioned, with like Watson's injury and Dobbs's concussion history. And, Gutekunst was quick to say, well, we don't think the concussions are like a big, deal for Dobbs. Like, obviously, when you have a couple of concussions in succession, it's obviously concerning, but they don't see it as a long-term problem, I guess, going forward, which I guess we will see going forward. Obviously, this past season, Dobbs had that concussion against oh goodness, I forget which game it was, but then was forced to wear a Guardian cap for the rest of the year, or chose to wear a Guardian cap for the rest of the year, rather.
Right, and he
then
missed
had
at least one game or a couple games with that first concussion.
Yeah, missed a few, I think. And then, obviously had that second concussion in the playoffs, so not ideal, but sounds like they don't think it's going to be a long-term thing. And, Gutekunst said, he's excited about. They asked him about essentially like having to bring in a receiver with those two guys, and with Watson specifically missing a lot of time. But Gutekunst, as he often will do, said, he's excited about the opportunity that will be available for other guys on the roster, which to me just like is like I'm excited to see Dontavian Wicks play more, because I'm guessing he's not talking about Melton and Heath. I guess he could be talking about maybe Jaden Reed just playing more in two receiver sets. But in terms of Wicks, this was something that was interestingly floating around Packers Blue Sky, Packers, internet recently, was that per fantasy points data, Wicks ranked first in their separation score versus zone coverage and third in their separation score against man coverage, behind only Zay Flowers and Mike Evans. So he's getting open. The next part would be catching the ball, which, he did pretty well his first year and a bit of a sophomore slump. Now we've seen that before from guys like Devontae Adams. So hopefully it's just something like that. But, the problem the whole last year was, getting open versus man coverage, and they do have a guy on the roster who can do it. It's just about, finishing those plays. And that was something that was a problem for all of the Packers receivers last year, which, leads me to think maybe they might have wanted to make a change at receiver coach, but they didn't. So I guess we'll see. But Dad, any thoughts on any of those quotes about the receivers? One other thing I did find interesting, they asked him about the passing offense in general and the struggles of it at the end of the year. And he said he thought that the offense was explosive, but didn't control the football game enough, and they have to improve on that situational aspect, which to me was like, does he think they need a possession receiver? Like, I don't know. But any thoughts on any of those receiver quotes? Any thoughts on any of that?
So the Wicks getting open thing, I know that he had done well the previous year. I hadn't looked at those numbers yet in the end this year for his getting open. He does, still doing well in that last year, even though he didn't take the jump that a lot of people were projecting for him. The Reed injury was, news to me. The fact that he's saying receivers are more NFL ready coming out of college seems to, we're going to keep drafting, and maybe does this suggest a philosophy that we're just going to keep drafting and not signing big contracts?
That would be
the kind of the logical conclusion there, is that, well, if they're ready coming out of college, then we don't need to pay top dollar.
Especially with both Watson and Dobbs going into the final years of their contracts. Right. Now, obviously complicated for them specifically with injury concerns, but I think that that's definitely something to think about, because the one thing is it's not a very strong receiver class. It's pretty weak, especially compared to years prior. But aside from this year, every other year, it seems like there's like 4 first-round receivers, 5 first-round receivers, and like 3 of the 5 every single year are like instant, like Brian Thomas Jr. this year, instant star. Malik Neighbors this year, instant star. Like et cetera, down the list. Like every single year, there's some rookie receiver just taking the league by storm. Puka Nacua 2 years ago. Obviously Justin Jefferson like 4 or 5 years ago. Jamar Chase like 3-4 years ago now. It seems like every single year there's like, okay, and obviously
somebody threatening the record for receptions or whatever.
Exactly. Part of that is they added an extra game, but either way, like and just this past
asterisk,
year,
what's
and Even guys where they didn't have great rookie years, like Jackson Smith-Njigba comes back this year and has a fantastic second season. So just on and on and on. It does seem like you mentioned, that receivers are contributing more often than ever early, and like Brian Gutekunst seems to believe as well. So that's a good question, especially with receiver contracts being super inflated. I mean, guys are getting like $30 million a year right now.
30 some, 34, 35.
Well, did you see the report about what Jamar Chase wants? You see this?
Does he want 40?
He wants 40.
He wants 40.
He wants $40 million. Like, well, I mean, they might have to give it to him, but
it's like, he's what it was. The price is the price.
Well, the other one is yesterday's price is not today's price.
Yes,
that's the classic.
That is definitely true in the NFL.
Yes, exactly. But I think it's a reasonable strategy. I think my thought on it is, if you have a top level guy, you just got to pay him. I don't think you want to give mid-level receivers like contract money, or even like mid-level money, like the middle class of receivers. Like you see guys like, I mean, this is the classic example, but like Christian Kirk getting like $20 million. Like,
right.
Like, what's the point? Just draft a guy. Like Christian Kirk's a fine player, but it's just not it's not good return on investment. Like you could get probably similar production out of a second round receiver that's like on a rookie contract.
Would you say
nothing.
That he's any better than Dobbs or Reed?
Yeah.
Or
I would say no. Exactly. Like guys that you're just like throwing picks at. And obviously, there's the opportunity cost of those picks as well, but I still think it's probably a better idea just to do that. And then final thing, just a couple odds and ends from Brian Gutekunst Presser. They're working towards bringing back Brandon McManus, it sounds like, which I think we all agree is probably a good decision, just given how much of a mess the kicker position was.
Wasteland we were in.
And he was pretty good throughout the course of the last year. And then in terms of Quay Walker, sounds like they're unlikely to pick up that 5th-year option and do that because numbers are weird. With edge rushers being included in that group in terms of the calculations for how much they're making. But the quote that was interesting was, quote, "Yeah, we'd like to find a way to keep Quay around here long term, whether that be an extension or something," end quote. So
what's the or something?
What are your thoughts on, well, I'm guessing the or something's like the Love contract where you just add a year, where it's like just like a 1 year, like short-term extension. What are your thoughts on that though? Bringing back Quay Walker, He played probably the best football he played last year, but also you just lost your linebacker coach that got him playing the best football he played last year.
Well, that's true. I'm worried about that, actually. What's going to happen with
me too?
With
Campanile moving he went to Jacksonville to be the defensive coordinator. For those that don't know,
right? It was not surprising that he didn't last long because
we got lucky to have him.
DC interviews a year ago,
yeah,
and we were able to get him as a linebacker coach.
And you look at it, it's like Quay Walker career year, Isaiah McDuffie career year, Eric Wilson career year, Edgerrin Cooper like all rookie team. It's like, yeah, he probably deserved to be a defensive coordinator. He's kind of doing a kick-ass job in the linebacker room.
Yeah, but I think it is fair that a lot of linebackers who end up being really good take a couple years.
It's true.
And Quay Walker has been playing better. I wouldn't hate the idea of them extending him and having a core being. I don't think it's going to. I don't think extending a linebacker is that expensive in terms of salary cap dollars. And
at the same time, it's like, if you're drafting a developmental guy, a traits guy, like, are you really just going to, like, as soon as he starts to develop, you're just going to let him leave? Like, what's the point then? Like, you didn't draft him to be good on his rookie contract. You drafted him to be good, like, as a developmental guy. So
and linebackers in the draft is a total crapshoot.
Yep.
You actually see that when I looked at the performance by linebackers per round, the best is like round 3.
Yeah, which
not
is like
round 1 guys.
No, which is the argument for not taking linebackers that high, as they took Quay Walker.
Yes,
but I mean,
but if you have a player that you think is coming along and playing better and doing well enough, your chance of actually finding that in the draft isn't great.
Yeah, and it's tough because Quay Walker can be a very frustrating player because he feels like he should be better than he is, and he just like is never really that he's never really that impactful.
Some better angles would be nice.
The difference between Edgerrin Cooper as a rookie and Quay Walker at any point in his career with the Packers is like just looking at that gap, it's like, wow, It's like, okay, I don't have to squint. Like when I watch Quay Walker, it's like I have to squint and I have to be like, well, if he just takes if he takes a little bit of a step processing here and really maximizes those tools, like he could get a little bit better at this, and then you watch Adrian Cooper play and you're like, wow, that guy is the truth.
Okay, the real deal.
At the same time, though,
we'll get more out of Walker.
More out of Cooper,
next to Cooper.
Oh, I was thinking more out of Cooper being next to Walker, where it's like, okay, you have this superstar potential linebacker. Let's not totally upend all the linebacker. Like, let's not just be like, all right, like you have to do all the work now. Like, let's not overload his plate.
Because they would be basically remaking almost the entire linebacker room.
Yeah. Well, Walker's going to play this year either way. Like
yes.
So they're going to have Walker this year either way. Whether they bring back McDuffie or Wilson, I guess we'll see. I would not be surprised if they brought back Wilson.
Bring back one of the two.
Yeah, I think it'll be Wilson, but I guess we'll see. I guess it also just depends on price. McDuffie's at least younger, so maybe they'll do McDuffie.
Wilson's
a better teams guy, but he's getting long in the tooth. But yeah, so that's at least interesting on Walker. But Dad, anything else from any of those Gutekunst press conference notes, or do you want to talk about maybe some other Packers Combine related news?
We could do some other news of things that have come out in the press through other people, or
well, let's start with Jaire Alexander, because I feel like that's probably the thing that everyone wants to talk about, right?
Yeah, it's getting a lot of buzz, and the things have been buzzing around Jaire since his exit interview, which wasn't really an exit interview. He had nothing to say.
I would say it wasn't really an interview. It was definitely an exit. It was not an interview.
I got nothing good. What did he say? I got nothing good to say.
I think he's nothing good to say, and I might not even be here next year or something like that. Yeah, no, that was something.
So the general opinion is that he's not going to be with the team next year.
Yeah, and they asked,
that is building steam.
Yeah, they asked Gutekunst about it, and it seemed like I saved that for this part. He did talk about it in that presser, but Gutekunst did say when asked about it, this is from Matt Schneidman, quote, "We'll see. Quote, we're working through that. He certainly could be, back with the team next season. But I think we'll work through that as we go. We've got to get him out there now. I think obviously we've talked about how there's been a lot of frustration on his part. He wants to be out there badly, and not being able to be out there at his best has frustrated him. And that has frustrated our football team too, because we're better with him, but we'll see," end quote. And Dad, like you mentioned, a lot of steam buzzing around that, especially with what Rappaport, reported out during the Combine.
Yeah, apparently, according to me and Rappaport, Packers have had trade conversations centered around Jaire and are open to moving him at the right price. Because this is,
So you know what was surprising me about
that? That's like a statement that's almost always true.
Well, yes, it's like except for about a few things. Like I don't think the Chiefs would be even.
There is no right price.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair.
Right?
But that's a better way of arguing it. But I was going to say, what was most interesting about that quote to me though? Open to moving Jaire Alexander at the right price. It was not like actively shopping. It was not looking to trade. It was open to moving, which was
that
weird
phrase
to me.
Is you've got to convince us to trade him,
which is surprising because it feels like if they don't trade him, they're going to cut him. So it's like, what do you mean open to trade? Like, I mean, I'd assumed that he would be a cut candidate because while, and Andy Herman has talked about this, he has a $25 million cap hit this year if he's on the roster. If you cut him, 18 of that is dead, and you save $7.3 million, which doesn't feel like a lot. But if you keep him 1 year at that $25 million and then cut him next offseason, it's $10 million dead. Still, like, it's not like that's just off the books the next year. So it's really over the next 2 years, $17 million in savings if you were to, cut him this year versus next year. And so it kind of seemed like a lot of people had been consensus that they were going to release him. But that language of open to trading, it could just be GM speak, right? Where it's just someone please give us something.
Right. This is we're
it's like, he's really valuable to us. You're going to have to pay a price,
Right. I read this as driving up the market.
Yeah, you're probably right. Because everyone knows, though, that
which means that this leak is coming out from the Packers.
Yes, that's probably
the agent.
100% true. And it kind of makes you think, because I had really thought that they would just be like, give us a sixth. Give us a sixth that can turn into a fifth or a fourth on playing time. Like something like that, where it's like, if you
maybe even swap we'll give you a seventh and you give us a sixth.
Well, I was thinking like a conditional sixth that can turn into a fourth if he plays more than like 75% of snaps, where it's like, okay, like it's contingent on him playing and, you're getting off the contract, but if he plays really well, you still get something back. If they can get anything more than a fifth or a fourth, I mean, I would be like, cool, like very, that's awesome. Sounds good. We'll take it. Because like at this point, I think they just need the savings because, I mean, he's played like half the games over the last 3 years.
At least 3, I think.
Yeah.
It's not, his availability has not been good. That's the thing. So, watch like some like.
Oh, he's going to go to like the Vikings and play out of his mind.
Games.
Yeah, no. But the thing is, weird.
Like, he'll be healthy for the next 3 years now.
Exactly. It's like Pro Bowl, All Pro. Yeah, no, exactly. It's a guarantee at this point. But so
we'd be doing Jaire a favor by trading him, so the karma comes back and bites us.
Exactly. It's like the Mavericks trading Luka, and now he's going to get in super shape and just be jacked all the time. Yeah, it's like you didn't think about that, did you? But anyway.
Oh man.
I was going to say...
let's hope this, if you trade Jaire, doesn't turn into a Luka trade.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, sorry, Nico Harrison. But anyway, I was going to say, trading Jaire, in my opinion, doesn't really change the Packers' needs. I know that might be a hot take. Like, I think, it's just you can't really rely on him being out there anyway, right? Like,
we already know what the secondary is like for the whole second half of the year.
Yeah. It's like, and it was fine. It's like, it was fine.
They don't bring Stokes back either, which nobody expects.
I don't think they will.
He was barely playing at the end of the year.
They benched him the last 2 games.
5 snaps a game or something.
Less. I think 5 snaps total the last 2 weeks. It was like nothing. He barely played in the last 2 games of the year. So, yeah, I mean, I'd be stunned at this point if they brought him back.
And I actually think that is informing their decision about Jaire as well.
Yeah. I think... I mean, the thing is, like, and they talked to him about, like, they also asked Gutekunst about Keyshawn Nixon, whereas, like, what do you think about his performance as quarterback 1? And it was a lot of platitudes. But, like, I think the main point is, like, the
what's
corners...
What's he going to say? It's like, oh, man, he's out of his mind.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, I do think, I would like to see someone brought in to compete with him and Valentine, with Nixon and Valentine. I think you already got your slot guy in Bullard, and you're going to want to develop him there. I think Nixon and Valentine were fine last year because you can't tell me that the pass rush was awful, and the secondary was awful, and yet the pass defense was fine. Like, we know the pass rush was terrible, and so if the pass defense was pretty good, then the coverage must have been pretty good. So it's like the corners can't be that bad.
Well, it could be just having like really good safety play
negates the need for
all corners look better. Maybe teams are thinking about this wrong throughout the league.
Yeah, maybe
that safeties are actually more important than they've been.
The argument for the corners is like you don't have the flexibility to play man as much with like the corners that you have, and like fair enough. That's a fair argument, but
I also think they're going to add 3 corners this year somehow.
Really,
they could be losing possibly 3.
Oh, well, I see what you're saying, but I mean, I expect just depth. I don't expect they're going to add like 2 new starting corners.
No, but I think they need to add corners, and I'm sure they're going to hope that one of the 3 will be competing for starting.
I guess we'll see. I mean, there are some ones available in free agency. We talked about Paulson Adebo, which you were very high on, assuming he can come back from injury all right. And it's a pretty good corner class. So, but anyway, moving along to other pieces of news from the Combine. The Packers might be the soft team. We're getting clowned online about this. I hope you know.
So much abuse about
the Packers.
The team that wants to get rid of the tush push.
Yeah, if you didn't know, the Packers. An anonymous team petitioned the NFL to ban the tush push again this year.
And it lasted a hot second,
about a day. Yeah, and then it was revealed.
A day, right?
I think it was Diana Russini who reported it initially that the Packers were the team. Gutekunst said he didn't really have any comments about it. They hadn't really talked about it. I'm guessing it's not really a part of his job description. That's more from probably Murphy.
Yeah,
and
he makes those.
Yeah, Gutekunst said he didn't really have any comments on it. But did mention that they themselves do use the tush push when they run it with Kraft. So, it's not like they don't use it either. But I don't really have anything to add there, just a, kind of funny little piece of information.
Yes, and I don't think anything's going to happen. I don't think this is going to actually go through. There was, I think I heard a report, was it today or yesterday? The NFL released a report that there weren't any injuries on tush pushes.
Yeah. I mean, so, I don't know. I saw Chris Jones rubbing his neck after one of those tush pushes in the Super Bowl.
He was actually in the Super Bowl. He was like, his neck was bothering him.
Yeah, I was going to say, well,
maybe they worded it in the regular season. I don't know.
Yeah.
There was something about, made it sound like they don't think this is something that needs to be done.
Exactly. Next piece of notable news, Dad, was the Packers ranks on the NFLPA report card. Anything you wanted to touch on there? So the Packers ranked 7th overall. A couple notable pieces, though, right?
Yeah. There are two I thought were the most notable, and neither one of them was good.
Yeah. 7th overall is not bad, though.
7th overall is actually
keep
good.
that in mind.
It maybe wasn't quite as good as last year, but it's close.
I think we were 3rd overall last year, if I remember correctly. So this is, if you don't know, this is the anonymous survey of players done by the Players Association about, the coaches, the strength conditioning, the facilities, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Dining halls, food, nutrition, everything pretty much.
Family friendly, what they think of the ownership and what they think of the coaches.
Yep.
Like a whole lot of different categories that get rated.
Yeah.
But anyway, in terms of what changed, the biggest drop was how the strength and conditioning coaches were rated. They went from being 8th best in the league to 27th.
Yeah. Which and it's a new strength and conditioning staff. So the players seem to not like them as much.
Yeah. They went from a big drop. And I think what you mentioned, you found that only 85% of the players reported getting an individualized training plan, which is 29th
of 32. So
that wasn't good. And then the other one we talked about, this is such an easy fix, and yet they didn't do it. They're one of only 3 teams that don't provide daycare services during games, right?
And that was one of the things that players specifically requested last year.
It's the number one request
was that they have better, have daycare. And so
listeners, I'm shaking my head.
Yeah,
what century are we in?
29 of 32 teams provide daycare for, players' families on game day, and the Packers are one of 3 teams that don't, and it was one of the things that was requested. So, come on, guys. You have plenty of money. Just provide daycare. It's not that hard. And other than that, they did say that they thought the treatment of families was good. I think they said above average in terms of organizing events for the families, and above average in providing, place for families to watch the games from, et cetera, et cetera. Just have daycare. Every other team has this. Come on now. It's not hard. And then the final thing, though, that I thought was interesting was the quote, when asked what the team currently does best, players praise the team culture, which is reflected in strong ratings for head coach Matt LaFleur and president CEO Mark Murphy, end quote. And that was from Matt Steinman at The Athletic. So, there are things they can improve, but I think for the most part, you take 7th, right?
7th is still, top 10.
Top
quarter.
Take top 10. Yeah. So that's fine. Other rumors from the from the combine that might be related to the Packers. Davante Adams. We have some news reporting there. Have you seen the picture of the Jets GM, by the way?
I've only seen a still shot. I haven't seen the video. So
he looks younger than I do. He looks really young. And someone reposted or reskeeted that picture, and then Vincent Adultman.
I know, I did not see this.
Which was really funny.
So he's really just 3 kids in
a trench coat. Exactly. Does no one else notice that this guy has 3 kids? Clearly 3 children in a trench coat. But yeah, no. But anyway, he had some stuff about Davante Adams, which might be of interest to Packers fans.
Yeah, so the rumors have been floating around there, and people kind of connecting dots about his salary cap versus what he's likely to actually play on. And so the quote from the Jets was that Davante is on the team right now. We have a plan there. In the next few weeks, we'll address that issue. So it's this is very much
not going to be
is
amazing, right? That's doing an amazing amount of lifting.
We just haven't gotten around to cutting him yet.
Yeah, on the team for now. It's no one made you say right now. He did not need to say that. He could just say Davante is on the team. No one made him say right now.
You're not exactly increasing any leverage you have with that. And if you're looking for a trade partner with that statement.
Yeah, and I mean, they restructured his contract when they traded for him this year, if I remember correctly, which kind of always indicated that this was a bit of a 1-year deal.
Yeah, I mean, his cap hit is like $38 million or something this year.
Totally untenable. Yeah, they're not going to do it. So, but he has talked about, Devontae Adams himself, that is, interest in playing on the West Coast, and I'm sure that interest would be even higher if Rodgers ends up with the Rams, right? Which, this whole Stafford, I think that's probably the most interesting thing happening right now in the league right now is like where Stafford ends up and then the fallout from that.
Right. So the story with Stafford is what the Rams have agreed to let him talk to other teams.
Yes.
And apparently, I guess the rumors this last couple of days is that he was talking to the Giants. Well,
and the Raiders, yeah.
And maybe.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, depends who you believe. Yeah,
depends who you believe. Whether he's talking to the Raiders, who just happens to be, at the same ski resort as Tom Brady,
with his close friend Tom Brady, who is not acting as a representative of the Raiders in this scenario. That is this should not be allowed. Like this is crazy tampering.
I just have a personal relationship. It's not tampering.
But
I'm talking to my buddy.
The reasoning for that is, if Stafford moves. There was also some reporting that the Rams might be interested in Rodgers, and if Rodgers goes to the Rams, you'd imagine Devontae would follow him.
Was this Rodgers saying, he would like to go to the Rams?
Where do you think he ends up?
And bring Devontae with him if Stafford goes somewhere else.
As a brief aside, where do you think Rodgers ends up? Like when the musical chairs, when everyone's like, does he have a seat?
I heard somebody say something about this, that he was now. I also saw something in addition to the Stafford to the Giants that Rodgers was talking to the Giants as well.
Just stay in New York and just go to a different team?
And which people were saying, does this mean the Steelers aren't showing any interest?
I was going to say the Steelers because...
That makes the most sense to me.
Yeah, and like him and Tomlin apparently has some rapport, and it's a win-now team, and because why would he... what's the point of going to the Giants? I understand the Giants are desperate because, I think there's a mandate from the ownership, hey, you need a quarterback right now, and you guys need to turn this around. Would the Giants
let him run the show? Maybe
they're desperate enough. They might, yeah. That you're not going to get that kind of power with the Steelers. That is definitely for sure.
Or the Rams,
and really any team that has half a brain cell. Saw how it went.
Any team that's actually competing is not going to do that.
Yeah. It's and the thing is, that's the thing with Rodgers is he doesn't want to he doesn't want to win at all costs. He wants to win his way. It's the same thing with the offensive system. He wants he could run the Matt LaFleur system and be amazing and win 2 MVPs, but he wants to do it on his terms in his way. And so I wonder if he's you know what, I could go to the Steelers and just be a Peyton Manning end of career Broncos where it's yeah, you're there, but you're not the focal point of the team.
He's got more arm left than Manning did at that time, or at least partway. I guess by the end of Manning's career in Denver, his arm was dead.
Yeah, that he's got full noodle arm by the end of that. But that is true. But I don't know. It seems like he doesn't want to do that. He doesn't want to just be along for the ride. He wants to just still be,
If he wants to be in a team that has a chance, the Steelers and the Rams seem to be the only options.
Vikings,
if the Rams become an option, which might not happen.
Vikings
or the Vikings. Yes, that's the other one. That's getting a lot of play, funny. But I don't know if there's actually any information out there. Just everybody is, this makes perfect sense. He's just on the same
full
trajectory.
Circle. Yeah, exactly. No, it would be funny if he just mimicked the Rodgers thing.
If he goes to the Vikings, states out there, don't let him in charge of your whatever grant program.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, don't let him touch any of the
if welfare he's on that same trajectory.
Exactly. Yeah. No. Yeah, I mean, what is it? History rhymes sometimes. Yeah, I don't think he's good. I think the Vikings are smarter than that. I think they're just going to ride it out with McCarthy, and just see what happens. Or maybe the tag and trade Darnold, but who knows?
Anyways, that was another rumor.
Yeah. Speaking of Vikings tagging and trading Darnold, Dad, do you want to just quick, rapid fire us through the rest of these maybe rumors that might have some stuff to do with the Packers?
There's rumors that are only tangentially connected to the Packers. So Vikings, because they're in the same division, and they said the rumor that came out this week is that they're going to tag and trade Darnold rather than keep him or just let him walk. So then tag and trade him to where? The Rams? If Stafford leaves? Maybe.
The Raiders, if they can't land anyone, maybe.
The Giants?
Is he going to do the New York? Maybe. The Jets?
Go back to New York again?
Go back to the Jets? No, they're not going to do that.
That would be crazy talk for him.
That would be insane. I cannot imagine. I mean, it'd be very, very great content. But anyway,
that would be there's some popcorn that you need for that show.
But anyway, please continue.
And then other ones. So players that we've talked about, people have talked about potentially trades for the Packers are wide receivers Deebo Samuel and DK Metcalf. Apparently, the Niners are working to honor Deebo Samuel's trade request, according to the GM John Lynch. I think he spoke this week, so they're still looking to try to find a trade partner for him.
Yeah, and I know the Packers need a receiver. I'm not interested. No, thank you.
He's declined
on the back
the last
nine,
couple of years.
Heavily on the back nine. He's on the back like 5 of his career.
Yeah, he's I guess just taking too much punishment with all the ball carrying as well as receiving.
And like, he comes into camp out of shape a bunch. Like there's those pictures of him around the Super Bowl where he's clearly put on some weight. Like, yeah, I just don't think so. But and he was someone that Brian Gutekunst brought up, specifically by name.
That was the thing that gave him a little bit of legs, is because he mentioned him and DK Metcalf both by name.
Yeah, as just as players that they were interested in that draft. By the way, not that they were specifically looking at them right now, but that they liked them previously.
Often add players later on in their careers that they were interested in at the draft.
It's true. But speaking of that, DK Metcalf.
Speaking of DK Metcalf, he seems less likely based on the quotes. So the Mike McDonald for the Seahawks spoke at the Combine and said that the Seahawks want to make Metcalf a focal point of their offense next season, which is not the same as trading him away.
Like they're not going to trade him. There was some, because I think his cap hit's pretty big this year. There was some thought that maybe he'd be on the block, but no, it sounds like no. So not an option for the Packers, unfortunately.
Seems less likely, unless he's like, oh, we really want him. Yeah. So you're going to have to really give us
open to trading
offer.
Yeah, exactly. You're going to have to really, exactly. It's like the Jaire thing.
We want to keep him, so if you want him, it's going to cost you a bunch of first round picks.
I'd trade Jaire a second and a third for DK. I'd probably do that. But anyway, fair enough. It's like trade that for Patrick Mahomes at this point. Why not? But anyway, and then a couple pieces from some actual, combine guys that we are interested in, both Caldwell and Izaraku.
Yeah, guys that we had been mocking recently, and are players we said we were interested in the first couple of rounds, and from their own interviews at that. So the players we're hearing from GMs, we're hearing from coaches, we're starting to hear from the draft prospects as well as they get up to the mic. And Jamari Caldwell, defensive tackle, who said he's dropping weight. He was at 342 at the Senior Bowl. He says he's now down to 334 and hopes to actually get down to the mid to upper 320s by his pro day. So he's trying to get a little slimmer and faster, it looks like. And he's shown some explosiveness already. Maybe not top end speed, but showing some explosiveness. And another edge rusher you liked, and his tape looks nice as well, Donovan Ezeraku. He was a team captain at BC, I found out this week. He mentioned that he was, he told a story that he was a little bit surprised about how the underclassmen were thanking him for his leadership after his final game. Packers like captains.
Yep, they do. And, some connection there with Hafley as well.
Yeah. According to Tom Silverstein, I think he's the one who first broke this story. He said that Ezeraku wouldn't mind a reunion with Hafley, and I think there's assistant D-line coach or... Yeah,
Ogabase.
And that he had talked with the two of them not that long ago. Not too long ago, I think was the quote.
Yeah.
I don't know what that means in terms of real days or hours. And that he played last year at 247 pounds and thinks he could actually put on weight to get into the 250s.
I guess we'll see what he weighs in at
naturally.
Here. Yeah. And then the final thing I wanted to touch on just in terms of combine news is a lot of players not participating this year. This is from Matt Miller on Blue Sky. List of players so far who are not going to be participating in drills: Abdul Carter, Mason Graham, Michael Williams, Jalen Walker, Shadur Sanders, Colston Loveland, Tyler Warren, Elijah Arroyo, Will Johnson, Kenneth Grant, Mason Taylor, Walter Nolan. All those guys are like projected top 50 guys, or almost all of them. So, big long list of players that are not expected to. Ashton Ginty also not expected to work out. A lot of players each year, it seems more and more, are not doing the combine. At least the top guys are not doing the combine.
And Carter, he's not surprising because he's got the stress reaction in his foot.
Yeah, which
and he probably won't do a pro day either with that, and just question of whether he'll get surgery or not. Which
it sounds like he's not going to, based on the last report. But there was a thought that surgery might be required. So hey, hopefully the top 22 teams stay away.
23, I think, is a good spot for him.
Exactly. No, if he fell, sprint the card, sprint it in. If he even falls to 15, sprint to trade it. I don't care.
I think if he falls to so you start tripping the other the other teams before they're trying to go up there with their cards.
Tanya Harding.
Oh, they missed their time. Yeah, it's our pick now.
Exactly. But anyway, so that was the main news from the, relation in terms of what's going on at the Combine related to the Packers. Let's move on, though, Dad, to just a couple more odds and ends. Let's start with some recent mocks, though, by some insiders from around the NFL. A number of, these guys who do these mock drafts for a living have a lot of, pull and, a lot of ears and eyes inside of different front offices. So they actually know some stuff. And so looking at some of those experts and who they're mocking to the Packers can often be interesting. For instance, Daniel Jeremiah was one of the only people in the world who had Quay Walker mocked to the Packers, at the, near the onset of the draft. And we all thought he was crazy.
I thought he was out of his mind.
Yes. And he knew something. So let's talk a little bit about those mocks in the past week. In terms of the most tapped in guys, Daniel Jeremiah on the February 18th, he's, a guy who has been in the scouting community for a long time, has been in the draft community for a long time, knows a lot of people. He mocked Ohio State offensive tackle Josh Simmons to the Packers. I'm more interested in this positionally, whether or not the Packers might be interested in adding, some more offensive line there after, even after taking Morgan in the first round last year. That's interesting. Kuiper mocked Florida State cornerback Azaria Thomas to the Packers. Field Yates also mocked at corner to the Packers. Both those guys are of ESPN. He mocked Maxwell Hairston of Kentucky to the Packers. Bucky Brooks, also of NFL.com, mocked Texas A&M edge Shamar Stewart, and Dane Brugler of The Athletic mocked Tyleik Williams of Ohio State to the Packers. So, Dad, it seems like, a lot of the tapped-in guys had either, had corners or linemen, which, is kind of what we expect. But I am interested, at least in the offensive line from Jeremiah Farley, most of all, just because that doesn't seem like a need, especially after going Morgan first round last year. But we didn't think linebacker was a need. So,
yeah, people have been talking about it being kind of a sneaky need with 3 of their starters. Coming to the end of their contract this year,
with Tom Ryan and Walker.
And Walker all from the same draft.
Yep, it's true.
So that's one reason to think that. And another is people think, their line is good, but maybe not elite. So they can keep adding players. And I looked at 16 different mock drafts, and just in terms of, in addition to these more kind of plugged in guys, 5 of them had this is only first round. 5 went offensive tackle, 5 went corner. Those are the 2 most common positions. 3 went edge, 3 went D tackle, and 3 and then the most common player was Josh Simmons, which maybe people were adding him because Daniel Jeremiah did, because all those mocks were in the last week.
Yeah.
So are those independent choices or not? I would be surprised if they're always independent of each other.
Exactly. Yeah. And so I'm guessing a lot of them are following along with Jeremiah, but I did just think that was interesting, what are your thoughts on, just quadrupling down on line and just being like, hey, we're just going to try and recreate what the Eagles and Lions are doing, which I wouldn't hate it.
Shock me if they pick an offensive lineman in the first round.
Yeah. It
wouldn't. And sometimes I've been doing, as I do mock, sometimes the best player there is an offensive tackle. It's like, do I want to pick him or do I want to trade back?
To me, it depends.
Trade back might be actually the most likely scenario. Maybe, out of all these scenarios where people are choosing tackle or corner, maybe the most likely scenario for the Packers is going to be trading back.
Yeah, to me,
and that's from another quote from Gutekunst. Somebody asked him, what do you think you do with only whatever
7 picks so far?
So far.
Yeah, exactly. I was going to say, though, that I think, to me, it just depends on which edge rushers are on the board there, because I just think the edge is such a massive need, And
it's a good edge class.
It's a great edge class, exactly.
So the question, so they might say, well, then you can get a good edge rusher 10 picks later, 5 picks later.
They need a star, though. That's the thing. Do they need another 4 B+ players? No, they don't.
This is something we've talked about. And I think and Gutekunst's idea of I just need more picks so I can take more shots at it. What we're lacking on the Packers
star power
is star power, not, a little bit above average
the
good players.
The overall like level of the team is pretty good. Like you're pretty decent at every
spot. We need
to
add like 2 to 4 stars.
Difference makers.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But anyway, speaking of the strengths of the draft, though, Dad, you were looking over the consensus big board. What did it say, overall with the strengths of the draft? We talked about how Brian Gutekunst seems to think it's O-line and D-line. Does that, stack with the general consensus so far as we wrap up here for the day?
Yeah, so I used the mock draftable consensus big board, which takes like every ranking board out there as well as mock drafts and incorporates them into a single rank. And so then what I did is I assigned a kind of rank value. It's basically, the reverse of the order of the rank. And I just went for the top 300 because if we're looking at first couple rounds, I didn't want to feel the need to go lower than that. So the position that had the highest total score, so which incorporates the number of players at the position in the ranking plus their actual ranks, was edge. And the actual number, doesn't matter. But if you break it down, in the top 50, there are 11 edge rushers in the top 50.
Yeah, and so that
way more than the next highest position is offensive tackle at 7.
And just to compare to last year, in the top 50, there were only 6 edge rushers. So twice as many as there were last year. It's a very strong edge class.
Yeah. It's way better than last year. And offensive tackle is actually not quite as good as last year. Last year, there were 10 in the top 50. And this year, there are 7.
Yeah.
And D-line, there are 6. So D tackles.
Yeah.
There are 6.
Although last year was also a very strong tackle class in terms of like, you looked at, it was Alt, Fashanu,
Fatanu,
the guy who ended up going to Tennessee out of Alabama. I'm forgetting his name. Big bowling ball of a man.
I don't remember all the.
Either way, there were a ridiculous amount of tackles taken in the first round, and then Jordan Morgan, if you want to count him as a tackle, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, yeah. So it may be that this year is more kind of typical, or maybe still slightly above average, just not exceptional like last year's offensive tackle class. And the D line, the D tackle group, is actually significantly larger this year than last year. 6 in the top 50 and 11 in the top 100, as opposed to only 3 in the top 50 last year. So if you combine that into a single D line, which I think is what Gutekunst was doing, then we're talking about 17 of them in the top 50 this year versus only 9 last year.
Yeah, and if you're
so
looking,
like a third of the top 50 are
D linemen,
potential pass rushers.
Exactly, and we've talked about this, looking at guys like Ezeraku, looking at guys like Derek Harmon, looking at guys, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, down the list, looking at guys like Pierce Jr. But I was going to say, and you look down the list, wide receiver, much weaker this year, only 5 in the top 50 after 10 in the top 50 last year. You look, down the list as well. There are a good amount of wide receivers in the top 100 still. It's still 15,
10 of them.
15 receivers in the top 100 overall, whereas there were 18 receivers in the top 100 last year. So, some good day 2 options at receiver, but just that's not really what the Packers need.
Not so many. But maybe one of those guys at the beginning of the second round could be an upgrade.
And, I also
like guys
found
like Royals and Higgins and Harris as potential, high volume possession receivers.
Yeah, and Brian Gutekunst talked about needing to be better situationally on offense, so maybe they value a position guy there. But at the same time, it's like we don't really need another wide receiver too, in my opinion. So I guess we'll see.
I think what we need is an elite red zone receiver.
Yeah. I mean,
bucket getter.
You feel like Dobbs is that though, right? Of the guys you have, I mean. That's the thing, is not elite. I just think you need like an elite guy, but I don't think there is one of those in this draft outside of the top 10. I did find it interesting also.
There's nobody as good as Malik Neighbors in this draft.
No. I mean, McMillan, maybe. But the corner group being considered strong this year does not have as many people in the top 50 or top 100. Just considered strong. I mean, like anecdotally, people seem to talk about it like it's a good class. But last year there were 8 corners in the top 50. This year there are only 6. Last year there were 14 corners in the top 100. This year there are 11. So kind of a down year for corner, even though some people seem to really like the corner class, at least overall. And, by the consensus, it's not as good of a corner class as last year.
Yeah. And by like positional ranking, last year it was the second highest cumulative grade for
in terms of the rankings,
for position ranking based on number of players and where they're ranked. While this year it's the fourth highest.
Yeah, exactly. And so it's just something to keep an eye on. But anything else on the strength of the class that stood out to you, or should we wrap things up here? Because we're gonna have a lot to talk about next week. I'm excited.
Yeah,
a lot of data
coming in. That edge group and the D, I wouldn't mind them going edge and D tackle with the first two picks.
Yeah,
for example,
you just wonder where the D tackle plays when they play. But if it's a good player, you just take them. But anyway, we're gonna have a lot more information to talk about next week, though, as we break down this weekend's combine. So keep your eye tuned out for that. Thank you again for listening. We're doing an episode of this every single week for the entire offseason, so don't turn that dial. If you like what you hear, please subscribe with us, Spotify, Apple, YouTube. Leave a review, leave a comment, tell a friend. We'd really appreciate it. Follow us on Blue Sky at Father Son Packer. We skeet out whenever there are new, Packers-related news items, whenever we have new episodes out, whenever there's content from other Packers content creators that we enjoy, one-stop shop and everything Titletown. But anyway, thank you again so much for listening. Like we mentioned, we'll be doing a breakdown of the combine next week, which we know is always very important for the Packers as they love their elite athletes. And until next time, go Pack Go.
Go Pack Go.